Hello, my good people. Back in my day, every somewhat successful cartoon series had at least one video game tie-in. These could range from pretty good to okay to oh god, kill me now. However, with all the crappy ones, there are some that are well above average, and it really feels like the developers put their heart and soul into making these games that are both funny and accurate to its source material. So today, I'm going to be counting down my personal favorites. Note that I've set down two rules for myself. One is that it has to be based off an animated series and not a movie, and second of all, only one game per franchise, for the sake of variety, so don't expect to see, say, multiple SpongeBob games on here. Anyways, let's go! Ren and Stimpy, Stimpy's invention. If you want a fun and somewhat challenging platformer starring everyone's favorite dumb cat and psychotic dog, then this is a good pick for you. Gameplay-wise, it's a typical 2D platformer with a decent amount of challenge, but not too much to the point where it becomes frustrating, for the most part. There's also some mixes thrown into the gameplay which spices things up, such as biking in a level and floating around using your gas. What I do like about this game is that visually it does somewhat capture the feel and look of the show. And Ren and Stimpy themselves have quite a varied moveset. For example, Ren can throw Stimpy's nose, Stimpy can use Ren as a bowling ball, Ren can use Stimpy as a jackhammer, and Stimpy can use a towel whip, for a few examples. This is also the only Ren and Stimpy game that allows you to play as both of the duo at once. I won't say this game is perfect, but it's probably the only Ren and Stimpy game worth playing. Mandark's Lab, a decently fun collection of Dexter's Lab-themed minigames with good 3D models and recreations of the show's environment, for the time at least. And the game is 100% fully voice-acted with the cast reprising their roles, and even some of the humor and style is replicated very well. The best parts for me were getting to walk around Dexter's house and lab, and the 2D cutscenes. Of course, as with every video game, it's the gameplay that matters most. So is it any good? Yeah, it's pretty fun. It's a kind of point-and-click adventure game that's minigame heavy. And while I'll admit not every minigame lands, most of them are pretty enjoyable and mostly varied in gameplay styles. With my favorites being What's Bugging Dexter, Dexter Dodgeball, and Sub-Zero Hero. Admittedly, the game is a little short, and it might be too easy for some people, though you could always try to go for a higher score. But keep in mind, this is a kid's game, and it came out at a time where every game, regardless of target audience, was balls to the wall hard. So it was probably refreshing for a lot of people back then to be able to actually complete something. Codename Kids Next Door Operation Video Game, a 3D platformer slash third-person shooter where you get to play as each of the 5 K&D operatives in a mission to stop the numerous villains from their dastardly plans. What I do like about the game is that for a 2005 game, the graphics look pretty nice and the level designs are good recreations of moments from the CN series. It's especially impressive that Kids Next Door has a very distinctive art style that could have easily gone sour when transitioning to 3D. As a fan of this bizarre yet quirky series, I'd say the writing is on point with its movie references, oddball humor, and most of the villains are boss fights in this game. Of course, the gameplay itself is good, otherwise it wouldn't be on this list, though for the most part it's not super challenging. Each character has a different style of gameplay, though they are pretty similar. Like number 1's gameplay is a third-person shooter, number 2 and 5's are more combat and platformer based, and number 5 even has a stealth section. Number 3 is about escorting fireflies and capturing hamsters, and number 2 is on a rail flying shooter, while on the flying bus. I think the one with the best gameplay is probably number 1 since I do like the third-person shooting mixed with the platformer, as well as the upgradable Gumzooka. Speaking of which, all of the show's classic weapons are in the game. The Spanker's even in this. Also, they're all upgradable if you collect enough parts, and they're pretty awesome to use. Overall, I had a good time. Adventure Time. Hey Ice King, why'd you steal our garbage? Whoa, that's a mouthful of a title. Anyways, Hey Ice King is a 2D side-scrolling platformer with some RPG elements. This is an enjoyable handheld romp through the land of Ooo that takes heavy inspiration from Zelda 2: The Adventures of Link, though nowhere near as hard. With its game structure, you know you're overhead when you explore and 2D when you're in towns or levels and enemy encounters, and you occasionally have to collect and return items to people to progress. but with its own Adventure Time twist. Also, the game is actually fun. The game has a variety of items which have some pretty useful effects, an upgrade system that can help speed up your movement and make you stronger against enemies, and overall has fun, satisfying gameplay. Apparently, Why'd You Steal Our Garbage had actual writers from the show work on the game, and it shows. Although the game for the most part isn't voice acted, the dialogue does feel like it came right from an episode of the series. It also has 4 major locations as playable stages, as well as numerous characters showing up in places. It should be noted that this game was released when Adventure Time was only on its 2nd season, so it does kind of reflect that, as the game's story is a little bit more nonsensical than epic and world building, and this was back when Ice King was actually the main villain of the show, and a villain in general. If you are going to get this game, I recommend you pick up the 3DS version, as not only are the graphics better and the backgrounds more detailed, but the soundtrack is much more awesome since it has more tracks and even has some music with vocals. Speaking of the soundtrack, just listen to some of this awesome music. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Turtles in Time, a 2 or 4 player, depending on what version you're playing, arcade brawler starring everyone's favorite heroes in a half shell. The gameplay is a pretty basic brawler, but it's oh so fun. Combat is satisfying, fast-paced, and each of the 4 turtles play slightly different from one another, so you might be tempted to try them all out. I've played both this game and the original TMNT arcade, and while both are good, I ended up choosing this one since there's a bigger enemy variety, the environments are more varied since we get warped through time, so you end up in some pretty crazy places, and the gameplay felt a little bit more addicting to me for some reason here. Also, the bonus levels where you rack up bonus points that differentiate from the game's main mechanic are pretty fun. Of course, when adapting a cartoon, or anything for that matter, into a video game, an important part is being true to the source material. And while they couldn't have gone all out being this is an arcade/Super NES game, they did a decent job as numerous things from the animated series are incorporated into this game, like recurring villains as being bosses, most of the main characters being represented, and some of the series' trademark like the brothers love pizza, and the slapsticky humor being represented in the game. DuckTales Remastered, a 2D side-scroller based off the classic 80s to 90s tune. WayForward took a classic game and remastered it for a new generation. Visually, it takes a page, no pun intended, out of the Paper Mario series and makes the backgrounds 3D while the characters are fully 2D, and it does make for a cool and appealing look to the game. As for the game itself, it's a great challenging adventure through plenty of varied locations from the moon, to the Amazon jungles, and even a haunted castle from Transylvania. What is pretty cool is that the game designers somehow made a cane, of all things, and made it into a fun and diverse weapon that also doubles as a pogo stick. It almost feels more like a power-up than something you get to use throughout the entire game. And you get to use it throughout the entire game. As the title implies, this is a remaster of an older game. And yeah, while it does seem like just an HD version at first, it actually does add more to the game, like upgrading the bosses to be more intense and unique from one another, adding Scrooge McDuck's mansion as a little hub world, complete with his money bin, in which you can actually do the impossible and swim in, adding some more cutscenes to the minimal story to make it feel more like an authentic episode, and even adding a new epic final level. And if none of this interests you for some reason, then you gotta listen to the awesome soundtrack. Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy, the sole video game adaptation based off Grim Adventures. Weirdly enough, it doesn't have a subtitle underneath like Supernatural Throwdown or something like that. Heck, it's not even called Billy and Mandy the Game. It shares the exact same title as the series it's based off of. I have a theory for this. The game was released in 2006, the year the show came to an end. Perhaps the developers of the game knew about this, so they didn't bother giving it a unique title knowing it would be the only game adaptation. Anyways, this is a 3D fighting game where players defeat other opponents until you're the last one standing, unless you're playing on teams. There's a variety of game modes to play through, which does add variety to this game, though the main gameplay style is the one you'll probably be playing most. Anyway, what I really like about this game is the fights are chaotic and the environments change as you play through them. For example, the level Pumpkin Pickle starts out with you fighting in a graveyard, then you leave and continue to fight on the streets of Enville while being chased by a giant pumpkin, and then you end up on the roof of a skyscraper. And that's just one example. The character selection is pretty great as well, as of course it has all the main characters, but it also has a few of the supporting cast and even a few memorable one-offs. There's a story mode, and while the story itself isn't amazing, the cutscenes really capture the humor and style of the show. But perhaps the biggest surprise is the fact that Weird Al is the announcer of the game. The game is better than it has any right to be. Like, there is a lot of effort, polish, and overall enjoyment. It honestly feels like they might have gone all out on making this game, since, well, they probably knew it would be the only Billy and Mandy game. South Park, The Fractured Butthole. Yeah, they're not even trying to hide the innuendo. Although South Park's most recent seasons have, in my opinion, gone downhill, and unfortunately some elements of this game reflect on that, it's an overall great and hilarious experience. An RPG with a grid-based combat system set in the town of South Park, where you take on the role as a new kid that you get to create yourself with a customizable feature. And I gotta say, you can create some pretty cool character designs with this, if you use your imagination. Anyways, what does work about this game is the overall humor and story. At first, it's a simple plotline about the boys of South Park playing superheroes and trying to find a missing cat. But as the game goes on, there's twists, turns, time travel cults, and a lot more insanity. But it still feels natural to the flow. Also, the humor is pretty friggin' funny. Sure, some of it's crude, crass, and even, in some cases, gross, but it still manages to make you laugh somehow through its twisted sense of humor. Of course, for a game to be any good, the gameplay has to be, playable. The gameplay is great. I enjoyed the grid-based battle system and the attack selections, as well as every party member has an ultimate, and you get some pretty cool summons to assist you in battle, as well as the game's use of, farts, yeah. The game has a farting mechanic, and it's actually pretty effective. For example, in battle you can use it to stop time and skip enemy turns, while outside of battle, it can be used to reverse time to help you solve certain puzzles and put objects back in their place. But what really deserves credit is how much they captured just about everything from the show. Almost every character is here and they're voiced by their original voice actors, and most of the main children are playable, and they all feel very in character. The full town of South Park is fully explorable, including almost every major location being available to explore, such as the house of the main characters, and the school, and even some of the restaurants like City Work. But perhaps the biggest plus this game deserves is the fact that visually it almost looks identical to the show. Sure, I know South Park doesn't have the most complex animation, but that's still an impressive feat to pull off, and not something many cartoon-based games can pull off perfectly. The Simpsons Hit and Run. What happens if you take Grand Theft Auto, set it in the world of Springfield, and tone down the overall content? You get this awesome game. An open-world, vehicle-heavy adventure game set in the universe of The Simpsons. The story that there's something odd going on. Black vans, robotic wasps, and Buzz Cola drinks are having a weird side effect on people. And it's up to the Simpsons family plus Apu to find out what's going on. The humor and writing feels as sharp as a Simpsons episode, and this overall story could work as an episode of the show. Gameplay-wise, it's kinda like Grand Theft Auto as you run around massive environments, complete missions handed out to you by characters. It also has bonus races and side missions, all of which are fun and enjoyable to complete. A lot of the missions involve racing a character to a location, collecting an amount of items before time runs out, or just smashing into an enemy vehicle to deplete its health. Although most of the missions are in vehicles, there are some on-foot missions and objectives. That's right, you can explore Springfield by foot and by car. And I gotta say, they did an amazing job recreating locations from the series. Different parts of the city are awesomely created and amazing for the time, 3D, and parts of the game require you to go inside buildings, such as the Simpsons house, the Quickie Mart, and Springfield Elementary, and they do look good, plus the little gags hidden throughout the game. Sure, it's a small thing, but I do like the extra effort made by the developers to help make this game feel more authentic. Speaking of which, Hit and Run does have a ton of nods to the series with its cars, character costumes, and even the collectible cards all being based off certain episodes. Also, I think everyone who's played this game did pull a 300 on Milhouse. While making this list, I unfortunately forgot about a pretty good cartoon-based game. However, thankfully I still have time to mention it and talk about it. So be sure to watch past number 1 for this honorable mention. SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom, the game that set a new standard for cartoon-based games. Battle for Bikini Bottom is pure 3D platforming magic. The story could be seen as kind of cliche since it's a robot invasion that our heroes must stop, But the execution, humor, and voice acting all bring the SpongeBob charm and humor to this game. The game is a collectathon where you run around massive environments, complete tasks to earn golden spatulas, and battle against Plankton's not-so-loyal robot army who are running amok. The levels are gigantic, and almost every memorable location from the show, such as downtown Bikini Bottom, Goo Lagoon, Rock Bottom, Jellyfish Fields, and even the Dream World from that one episode, are amazingly recreated in full 3D, and it all looks so good. Both the original looks decent today, and the remaster looks absolutely amazing, with its HD-ified graphics and its added extra references to the show. If you do buy this game, I recommend the rehydrated version, though the original is still great too. Plus, rehydrated makes the Kelp Forest level actually visible. Anyways, while the game is pretty similar to stuff like Banjo-Kazooie, since your main objective is to get enough golden objects to progress, and a good amount of the quests handed out by characters involve collecting an amount of items, locating something or some people, and you have to return to them to get your reward. But it's done in such a way that feels unique and new while capturing the feel of the SpongeBob universe. Every main character makes an appearance, and though only 3 are playable, each of them are utilized very well and are a joy to play. SpongeBob can use his bubble wand to summon missile strikes, toss a bowling ball, and even grow feet for his ground pound. Patrick can pick up and throw objects and stun enemies with his belly slam, and Sandy can use her lasso to grab baddies and destroy them from a distance, as well as swing across bottomless pits. And last but not least, the bosses of the game are a highlight, as they're fun, creative, and in some cases kind of intense. With its true understanding of source, brilliant presentation, vibrant visuals, and of course, gameplay that's still fun to this day, is it a wonder why Battle for Bikini Bottom is one of the few licensed games to get a remaster? Anyways, that was my list. I hope you enjoyed. See you later. Ed, Edd and Eddy, The Miss Edventures. A 3D platforming game where you get to play as all 3 Eds as they go on numerous adventures in their neighborhood. Although I'll admit the show's squiggly art style might not have translated well to 3D, the game itself is still a ton of fun. Depending on which Ed you're currently playing as, you can either use a slingshot, ram through objects with supercharge, or even have the 3 boys jump on each other's shoulders to make a tower. You can switch between any of them at any time, which is an addition I like, since it is based off a cartoon with a trio. A tag team gimmick suits the show well. One thing I do like is the fact that each level has its own separate story, which makes it feel like you're watching episodes. And yes, they do get the tone down, with its slapstick humor, every one of the main cast playing a role, and even having 2D cutscenes. The levels have you going through interesting locations that have that crooked style the series is famous for. And while the characters might have transitioned awkwardly to 3D, the environments still look cool, and are varied from a sewer to the neighborhood, and even a supposedly haunted house. Although the game is mostly a straightforward platformer, it does add unique objectives to help keep the game interesting and varied, such as a race, a bit of a stealth section, and we even got a bit of puzzle solving. But perhaps my favorite thing about the game is the unlockable bonus levels. Not only are these levels the best designed in my opinion, but they act as Bizarro episodes, presumably in the kids' imaginations. One of them we have Ed as a giant monster rampaging through a city, while the other has the boys in space fighting robots with lightsabers. One problem I do have with this game is that it's very short. So in other words, it's fun while it lasts. I'll admit this game does have some flaws, and it's not going to be Game of the Year or anything, but it's a surprisingly fun and well-made video game based off a classic series.